It began on a lonely stretch of highway in New Hampshire, a place where the night feels heavier than it should. The air was still, and the only sound was the rhythmic hum of the car's engine cutting through the darkness. It was September 19th, 1961, when Betty and Barney Hill started the drive back home from their vacation in Niagara Falls and Montreal, a journey that would mark the beginning of one of the most influential and debated encounters in UFO history. They were an ordinary couple by every measure. Betty, a social worker, was thoughtful, curious, and deeply compassionate. Barney, a postal worker and a member of the local civil rights movement, was practical, analytical, and rational. They were respected in their community, a biracial couple in a time and place where such unions were still rare, living quiet lives in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Nothing about them suggested they were seekers of fame or delusion, but as the night unfolded, they would find themselves at the heart of a story that seemed too strange to be believed. It was around 10:30 p.m. when Betty first noticed a light in the sky, a bright point that moved in a way no star or planet should. At first, she assumed it was a satellite or an airplane, but as the object grew larger and seemed to follow them along the twisting road, her curiosity turned into unease. She asked Barney to stop the car so they could get a better look. They pulled over at a scenic turnout near Indian Head, and Betty lifted a pair of binoculars to her eyes. What she saw made her blood run cold. The light was not distant anymore. It was an object, large and silent, moving with deliberate precision. Through the binoculars she could make out shapes, windows perhaps, and movement inside, as if figures were observing them. She handed the binoculars to Barney, who reluctantly looked. He was a pragmatic man, not prone to flights of imagination, but even he couldn't explain what he saw. The craft seemed to hover, then dip closer. Against his better judgment, Barney felt compelled to approach it. He left the car, his pistol in his pocket, and walked toward the object that now loomed silently above the trees. Through the binoculars, he could clearly see what looked like humanoid figures staring back at him. A wave of panic surged through him. As he would later describe, he felt a mental message, wordless but clear. Stay where you are and keep looking. Terrified, Barney turned and ran back to the car, shouting to Betty, "They're going to capture us." They sped away into the night, hearts pounding, trying to outrun whatever was following them. Betty kept looking out the window, watching as the lights of the craft seemed to dart and reposition themselves as though it were dancing above them. Then there was a series of beeping sounds, too short and mechanical, that filled the car. A strange tingling sensation spread through their bodies. The world around them dimmed. The road, the trees, the stars, everything blurred into a dreamlike haze. Then, silence. When they regained full awareness, they were nearly 35 miles further down the highway, with no memory of how they got there. It was just past dawn when they finally arrived home in Portsmouth, exhausted and confused. The trip that should have taken 4 hours had lasted more than 7. Something was missing, not just time, but certainty, reality itself. At first they tried to rationalize what had happened. They unpacked their belongings, trying to move past the unease, but little details began to emerge that refused to fit. Barney's shoes were scuffed and oddly damaged, as if he had been dragged across gravel. The strap of Betty's dress was torn, and a pink powdery residue clung to the fabric. The binoculars' leather strap was broken. The car had shiny, circular marks on the trunk, places where the paint seemed polished in perfect circles. When they brought a compass near these spots, the needle spun erratically. Betty felt a deep sense of dread mixed with an inexplicable curiosity. That night she began to dream. For 5 nights in a row she dreamed of the encounter, but the dreams were not like ordinary ones. They were vivid, detailed, and terrifying. In them, she and Barney were stopped by a group of small beings standing in the road. They were taken into a strange metallic craft. The beings were humanoid, with large dark eyes and small mouths. Their skin was grayish and their movements calm, clinical. Betty was examined by what she perceived as a leader who spoke to her in English but without moving his lips. He showed her a book filled with strange symbols and told her she could keep it as proof. But later, as the beings escorted her out, the book was taken back. When Betty asked where they came from, one of them showed her a star map, a pattern of points connected by lines. "Where are you on this map?" she asked. The being replied, Do you know where you are on the map of the universe? When she awoke, the dreams felt like memories. Barney dismissed them as just that, dreams born from stress. But both began to struggle with anxiety, nightmares, and flashes of fear they couldn't explain. Months passed, and the couple's health deteriorated. Barney developed ulcers and suffered from insomnia. Betty's fascination grew into obsession. She read everything she could about UFOs, convinced that what they experienced was real. In 1963, they finally sought help from Dr. Benjamin Simon, a respected psychiatrist and neurologist known for his use of hypnosis in treating trauma. Under hypnosis, their stories unfolded in separate sessions, without contact or influence between them, and what emerged was chillingly consistent. Barney described being taken aboard a spacecraft against his will. He recalled small, grey-skinned beings with large heads and wraparound eyes. They led him into a room filled with instruments and placed him on an examination table. He could feel cold metal against his back and strange figures touching him. One inserted a device near his groin. He remembered hearing a voice in his head saying that no harm was meant, but he was paralyzed with fear. Betty's recollections echoed his. She described being examined with a long needle inserted into her navel. When she cried out in pain, one of the beings touched her forehead, and the pain vanished instantly. Dr. Simon initially believed their accounts were products of stress, perhaps shaped by Betty's dreams and Barney's emotional strain. But as he continued the sessions, he was struck by the depth of emotion and the physical distress they exhibited while recounting the memories. Both wept, trembled, and showed signs of genuine trauma. Their testimonies matched in striking detail, details they had never discussed with each other consciously. When the sessions ended, Dr. Simon did not conclude that they had truly been abducted by extraterrestrials, but he could not dismiss the sincerity of their belief. He theorized that Betty's dreams may have been internalized by Barney, creating a shared delusion rooted in genuine fear. Yet he admitted that something extraordinary must have triggered it. The Hills case quickly drew attention. When the story became public in 1965 through a newspaper article and later in the book The Interrupted Journey by John G. Fuller, it ignited a cultural phenomenon. For the first time, the idea of alien abduction entered mainstream consciousness. Before the Hills, UFO sightings were common, but claims of personal capture and examination were not. Their story established many of the archetypal elements of later abduction accounts: the lost time, the medical experiments, the telepathic communication, the grey-skinned beings with large eyes. What began as a deeply personal trauma became a cornerstone of UFO mythology. Skeptics and believers divided sharply over the Hills account. Some pointed to the stress of their interracial marriage in early 1960s America, combined with the fatigue of a long drive, as psychological catalysts. Others noted that the hypnotic sessions could have unintentionally reinforced false memories. Yet there were details that remained harder to dismiss: the physical marks, the damaged clothing, and above all, the emotional authenticity of their reactions. Betty's star map, drawn from her hypnotic memories, became a focal point of debate. Years later, an amateur astronomer named Marjorie Fish attempted to match the pattern to known star systems. She concluded that the map closely resembled the region around the double star system, Zeta Reticuli. To believers, it was evidence that the beings came from there. To skeptics, it was coincidence, a pattern found in randomness. In the years that followed, Betty and Barney tried to return to normal life. Barney, however, continued to suffer from health issues and died suddenly in 1969 from a cerebral hemorrhage. Betty lived for decades more, continuing to speak publicly about the experience. She remained calm, articulate, and unwavering in her account. Over time, she claimed additional sightings and interactions, though even some UFO researchers regarded her later stories as less credible. Still, she never wavered in her conviction that what she and Barney experienced was real. What made their case so enduring was not just the mystery of what happened that night, but the human truth beneath it. Two intelligent, ordinary people, living in a time of social change and tension, were confronted with something they couldn't explain. Whether it was an extraterrestrial encounter, a psychological phenomenon, or a mixture of both, the Hills experience touched on something deeper, our collective unease about what lies beyond the familiar. Theirs was not a story of wild claims or hysteria. It was quiet, fearful, intimate. Years after the incident, analysts revisited the evidence with new tools. Skeptical investigators highlighted the inconsistencies, the shifting size of the craft, the lack of physical proof, the suggestibility of hypnosis. Others argued that radar data from that night showed unknown aerial phenomena in the same area. Yet even among skeptics, there was acknowledgement that the Hills' sincerity set their story apart. They were not seeking fame or profit. They reported the incident reluctantly, even fearing ridicule. In cultural hindsight, their experience arrived at a crossroads in American history. The Cold War anxiety, the space race, the dawn of the UFO age. The early 1960s were filled with both hope and fear about what might exist beyond Earth. The Hills' story captured that duality perfectly, wonder mixed with terror, curiosity fused with helplessness. For Betty, the experience became a lifelong search for understanding. In interviews years later, she said that she believed the beings had a peaceful intent, that they were explorers or scientists rather than conquerors. She described feeling a strange connection to them, as if they had chosen her for a reason. But she also admitted that the fear never completely went away. Each time she drove through the White Mountains at night, the memories stirred again, the sound of the beeps echoing faintly in her mind. The Hills' story influenced countless others. After their case, reports of abductions increased dramatically across the United States and beyond. The image of the gray alien with large black eyes became the default representation of extraterrestrial life in pop culture. Television shows, movies, and books borrowed elements from their narrative. What began as one couple's inexplicable night on a highway became the foundation of an entire subgenre of alien lore. But beyond its cultural echoes, the story of Betty and Barney Hill remains, at its core, deeply human. It is about how people confront the unknown, how the mind tries to bridge the gap between reality and the incomprehensible. It's about fear, memory, and the fragile boundary between dream and truth. Whether one believes their story or not, it forces a question. What happens to our understanding of the world when something impossible seems to happen to ordinary people? In the decades since, skeptics have continued to analyze the case. Some have proposed that the couple's experience was the result of sleep deprivation combined with the hypnotic effect of driving long hours at night. The beeping sounds they heard could have been mechanical noises from their car. The star map, a projection of subconscious imagery inspired by contemporary science fiction. Others have speculated that a radar target or military aircraft might have been responsible for the strange lights. Still, none of these explanations can fully account for the psychological aftermath or the matching recollections under hypnosis. What makes the Hills case persist is not its evidence, but its emotional power. It feels authentic, unsettling, and incomplete. It sits at the intersection of science and mystery, reason and belief. Every retelling revives the same tension between those who demand proof and those who accept experience as truth. Even now, more than 6 decades later, people drive through the same dark roads near Lincoln, New Hampshire, sometimes stopping at the historical marker that commemorates the event. The sign reads simply, "Close Encounter, September 19, 1961. It marks the place where Betty and Barney Hill's lives changed forever. Some visitors take pictures, others just stand quietly under the same sky, wondering what they might see if they looked long enough. In the end, perhaps the truth of what happened that night lies not in the evidence, but in the silence between the facts. Something terrified 2 honest people so deeply that the experience never left them. Something left physical marks, mental scars, and a legacy that reshaped the world's imagination about visitors from beyond. Whether that something came from the stars or from the hidden corners of the human mind, it remains one of the great mysteries of modern times. Betty once said in an interview late in her life that she didn't need anyone to believe her. "I know what I saw," she said softly, "and I know what we went through. That's enough." Her eyes, as always, were steady, not seeking validation, but peace. She carried her truth to the end through years of skepticism, ridicule, and fascination. And maybe that's what gives her story its lasting weight. Not proof, but conviction. The night of September 19th, 1961, still hangs over the White Mountains like a faint echo. The road is the same, the sky just as vast. Sometimes in the quiet of those woods, when the stars are clear and the air perfectly still, it's easy to imagine a pair of headlights winding down the lonely stretch of Route 3, and above them, a silent light following, watching, just as it did that night. Maybe nothing happened. Or maybe something extraordinary did. But one truth remains certain. Since the night of Betty and Barney Hill's journey, the boundary between the possible and the impossible has never been quite the same.